For years, the idea of American troops entering Iran was seen as a red line few were willing to cross. The costs were deemed too high, the risks too unpredictable, and the rewards too vague. And while Trump's New Deal with Iran has pulled both sides back from the edge, it has not removed the underlying problem. If diplomacy fails, either in the coming weeks or months, the next round of hostilities may not stop at missiles, sanctions, and naval pressure. At first glance, Iran seems like a natural fortress. Mountains encircle much of the country, while deserts, salt flats, and marshlands fill the spaces in between. An invading army would have to cross some of the most difficult terrains in the Middle East before even reaching any of the country's population centers. The Pentagon, however, would look for a workaround. Rather than driving deep into the interior, US planners would likely focus on Iran's southern coastline. This narrow strip of territory contains many of the country's most important economic assets, including oil terminals, commercial ports, and military facilities. It's also an area that is directly accessible from the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea, where the US Navy can operate with relative ease. But any attempt to seize territory would immediately threaten regional stability, and what looks like a list of military options could just as easily become a list of political, economic, and military liabilities. The first mile into Iran may be measured in kilometers, but the next 100 would be measured in years. Before we continue, a quick word from today's sponsor, Obscura. Have you thought about how much of your online behavior can be observed? How much information you give up when you browse the web? Right now, the EU, Great Britain, and the United States are working on laws they say are for protecting the children, but then require everyone to provide their identity, pushing all of us to hand over personal information like our face or ID, which will either get sold, leaked, or used to spy on you. That's why I like Obscura. It's a privacy-first VPN. Unlike most other VPNs, which can still see who you are and which websites you visit, Obscura is designed so that it physically cannot link your identity to your internet activity. It blends your traffic with the rest of the internet, which helps it work in places where other VPNs often get blocked. And because Obscura is open source, anyone can check the code for themselves. There is also built-in ad and tracker blocking, which you can configure depending on how much control you want over what websites can track. And my favorite part, you do not even need an email to sign up. So if you want a VPN that is actually built around privacy, go to obscura.com/Caspian or scan the QR code on screen. You'll get 25% off, bringing it to only $6 a month. Again, that is obscura.com/Caspian or use code Caspian at checkout. Washington and Tehran are on talking terms again, but only because the alternative is worse. For America, that is not exactly a victory. The nuclear question remains unresolved, Israel remains deeply skeptical of the process, and Washington's credibility depends on whether pressure can still produce restraint. If the talks fail, Trump would face the same impasse as before: how to create leverage over Iran without marching on Tehran. One option recently floated by US military officials is to capture strategic locations and turn them into a new pressure point. 5 such places stand out: Kharg Island, the Strait of Hormuz, the islands of Abu Musa, Greater Tunb and Lesser Tunb, the port city of Chabahar, and finally the oil-rich Khuzestan region. Each of these sites offers access into the country, but interestingly, none offers a path to strategic victory. The first option, Kharg Island, is the clearest example of how leverage can turn into liability. This small, isolated island is where 90 to 95% of Iran's crude exports pass through. Tankers line up offshore, load barrels of oil, and head to global markets. In every sense of the word, the island is a single point of failure. But Kharg was never designed by choice. The thing is, the Persian Gulf is a shallow sea, especially along the coastlines. Oil tankers, being massive in size and weight, require a depth of 25 to 30 meters for safe navigation. However, some parts of the Gulf are too shallow for that. As a result, Iran extracts and refines its oil near mainland fields, but the crude is funneled through pipelines to Kharg Island, where the water is deep enough for tankers to dock safely. For any US administration looking for real leverage, Kharg may be the next best thing to capturing Tehran itself. Seizing it offers a way to inflict maximum damage without pushing deep into Iranian territory. But that's exactly what makes it so dangerous. An attack on Kharg would not stay local. As Iran's primary oil export hub, any disruption would be felt far beyond its shores. Energy markets would react immediately, and the nearby Arab nations would brace for retaliation, as Iran would almost certainly look for ways to impose costs of its own. This then is the paradox of Kharg. The very thing that makes it an attractive target is also what ensures that any attack on it would spiral into an international conflict. The second option, another high-profile target, is the Strait of Hormuz. Few places carry as much strategic weight, but exercising control over it is far more difficult than it appears. There is no single target that can simply be captured. Hormuz is a complex patchwork of waterways, islands, coastlines, and military positions. Any attempt to secure it would also require operations against the city of Bandar Abbas and the island of Qashm. These two are deeply embedded in Iran's defensive posture and cannot be bypassed. This then creates a fundamental dilemma. Holding the strait would require more than a one-time operation. Iranian coastal defenses, missile batteries, and naval forces would have to be continuously suppressed, which in turn would require American forces to maintain a long-term foothold in one of the world's most contested places. And Iran has more than enough firepower to make any operation there extremely costly. From the air, waves of rockets and missiles could sustain pressure day and night. At sea, hundreds of fast attack boats could close in quickly and overwhelm fixed positions with rocket fire. So, the instant the US Navy begins operations to secure the Strait of Hormuz, combat would spiral from a limited operation into a prolonged war with global economic consequences. The third option is a cluster of islands in the Gulf. With little appetite for another open-ended conflict in the Middle East, some policymakers periodically point to smaller, more manageable objectives. Abu Musa, Greater Tumbs, and Lesser Tumb are often cited in that context. These three small islands form a strategic gateway at the entrance to the Gulf, and some have floated the idea of capturing them. The US Navy could send the Marines, secure the islands, restore the airstrips, open corridors for reinforcements, and eventually establish forward operating bases with supplies coming from Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. That sounds like a clean operation on paper, but in practice, everything about the plan runs into the same constraints seen in the Strait of Hormuz. In the last round of hostilities, every fixed US position in the Gulf proved difficult to protect. Iranian strikes damaged radars, missile systems, and more. If those installations couldn't be secured, then an amphibious landing stands even less chance. To clarify, the United States could certainly seize the islands, but the real pain would begin after the landing. Given Iran's firepower, they could just keep the islands under constant attack and turn them into area denial zones. And the scale of that firepower is hard to overstate. Iran's coastline stretches for over 1,500 kilometers, with the Zagros Mountains rising just inland, providing both reach and cover for launch positions. And then there are the systems that haven't yet been used at scale, such as fiber optic drones. These are drones guided via physical cables rather than radio signals and are effectively immune to jamming. Some of these cables are 60 kilometers long, which is enough to cover every Iranian island. When launched in large numbers, these drones can overwhelm and tear through any American contingent on the islands. The US Marines would essentially be sitting ducks. So, what seems like a low-cost operation could easily turn into a trap. The fourth option, and perhaps the least discussed entry point, is Chabahar. Compared to the heavily militarized Gulf region, this part of Iran is more open and less congested. It's also home to the country's only ocean-going deep-water port, which gives it some accessibility. But accessibility is not the same as strategic value. Chabahar lacks the leverage that makes the other targets compelling. It's not the center of Iran's oil exports like Kharg Island, and it doesn't sit near a critical choke point like the Strait of Hormuz. But Chabahar's secluded position, sitting far away from many of Iran's most important economic and military assets, cuts both ways. It makes for an easier point of entry and is less likely to trigger the kind of immediate escalation seen in the Persian Gulf. However, at the same time, Chabahar is so far removed from Iran's heartland that any US force landing there would still need to advance deeper into Iranian territory to gain more meaningful leverage. So, what begins as a limited operation to seize a deep-water port could quickly pull American forces into a broader ground war, with all the complications that follow. The fifth option, and arguably the most plausible route for a ground invasion, is Khuzestan. This one offers the most direct and most obvious path from the Gulf into one of Iran's most strategically valuable regions. Khuzestan is rich in oil, home to a large Arab population, and located a stone's throw away from the US military base in Kuwait. Khuzestan's proximity to Kuwait is not just a geographic detail. It means that any US contingent moving into the region would likely stage through Kuwait and then pass through Iraq's Basra region. In many ways, it would follow the same route Saddam Hussein used during the Iran-Iraq War. But unlike in previous conflicts, the corridor is no longer as permissive as it once was. Any advance through Iraqi territory will face pressure from Iranian proxy militias, including the Popular Mobilization Forces, whose numbers, according to the organization itself, are well above 200,000 strong. So, long before American forces would reach Iranian soil, a new, massive transnational war could rage across the southern half of Iraq. Which means the most direct path into Iran, Khuzestan, is also the most dangerous. Beyond the invasion routes themselves, there is another variable that could shape the course of the war: the Kurds. Any American incursion could create an opening for Kurdish militias along Iran's western border to intensify their activities. For America, the intent would be to stretch out Tehran's resources across multiple fronts and thereby weaken counterattacks. Iran's western border has long been a flashpoint for Kurdish insurgent groups. These include the Kurdistan Democratic Party of Iran, the Kurdistan Freedom Party, the Kurdistan Free Life Party, Kabat, and several Komala factions, many of which have recently moved toward greater coordination against Tehran. However, the Kurdish factor also faces certain limitations. The groups themselves are divided, differ in capabilities, and some may not even be willing to risk a large-scale fight with Tehran. Moreover, the Kurdistan regional government in Iraq has strong reasons to avoid becoming the next battlefield, particularly given the risk of Iranian retaliation. At the same time, the Iranian proxy militias operating in Iraq could swiftly turn the entire region into another front in the war. Meanwhile, Turkish officials would oppose any development that risks spillover into Turkey proper. More importantly, employing the Kurdish militias carries a political risk. Rather than weakening the Iranian state, American support for a Kurdish uprising could allow Tehran to portray the conflict as a struggle to defend its territorial integrity, and thereby strengthen national unity at a moment when Washington would be trying to undermine it. Taken together, these 5 options reveal a common problem. While each place offers meaningful leverage in different ways, each option also carries a high risk of escalating far beyond the original aims. This then is the central dilemma facing a ground campaign. The deeper the potential impact, the greater the risk of a wider regional war. Any foothold established through these 5 options would come with significant trade-offs and risks. Rather than creating leverage, American forces could find themselves stranded in hostile territory, exposed to attacks from mines, missiles, drones, and fast attack boats. This then is the nature of conflict. A military operation can begin with a clear objective, but then gradually take on a momentum of its own. Entering Iran is one thing. Sustaining a costly war, managing escalation, and translating military gains into political outcomes is something else entirely. Ultimately, victory is measured not by who can strike first or hard, but by who can endure the longest. And until death, all defeat is psychological. I've been your host Shervan from Caspian Report. If you enjoy these videos, consider supporting the channel on Patreon and click the bell icon so the next one doesn't slip past you. Thank you for your time and Saul.